Okay, it's February 21st, 2023, 7:30 PM. I'm going to call the regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Members present are myself, John Tehan, Bob Shabbat, Becca Sinoski, alternates Bill Bennell and Michael Johansson. We'll see Bill Bennell tonight for Doug Roberts and Mike Johansson for Joe Hall. All right, no applications for receipt tonight, no public hearings. So item E, new business, TZ-23-1, special permit renewal, section 15, excavation, sand and gravel at 180 Totland Turnpike. Applicant Diane Becker, owner Hope Mountain LLC. Do we have anyone on? See their attorney or anything to you, Mike?
I do not. Just see. I'm not sure who that is, Peter David, but I don't see anybody else here.
It's not looking like they're gonna be participating yet. We want to move on past all these for tonight.
Yeah, they had a conflict at the last meeting, which is why they asked it to push. So it's possible that they still have that. So we'll follow up with
All
that.
right, what's their time frame for getting this done anyway?
So it was submitted as required, and so the minimum that we would deal with this is 65 days. So we have plenty of time.
Okay, so as long as everything's looking good from that perspective. So we'll skip down new business 1 through 4. If they show up, I guess we'll recalibrate here, but we'll go right to item 5, strategic development zone workshop held jointly with Economic Development Commission. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you all.
So, how do we want to frame this? Like, where do we want to be at? Because
Yeah, so the history was that we obviously adopted the SDZ subsequent to receiving an application and through a text amendment submitted by a resident, and then which was modified and adopted, and then subsequent to that, a moratorium. We are now in a position where we basically have a small skeleton of what the SDZ was, which is in place in the regs as a placeholder, but it has no content. So it is useless. You can't seek an application under it. You can't ask a zone change. It doesn't function. Because the SDZ was originally developed, the idea and the process and the intent all came out of the EDC. We sort of arrived at maybe it's good for both commissions to have a discussion informally to figure out where we should go. So I don't have a lot prepared because I wanted you guys to be able to have this discussion openly, but I have something that I can pass out. And I explained this to the EDC at their meeting. I feel like there are at least sort of 3 large buckets when it comes to the SDZ, which is 1, what is allowed, right? The uses that are allowed within the SDZ zoning category. 2, where the SDZ can be, and 3, how these things happen, how we get there. So the rest of it is sort of design and is detailed that we would get to once we kind of figure out these 3 things. So what I did is I pulled those 3 topics out of the SDZ original format that I can hand out just so you can see what uses did we allow, and I can pass that out, and then I will hand that over. You guys can kind of go from there, and I'll assist as needed. But let's...
I'm looking at the entire regulation, which I think it will really work.
So none of this is currently enforced, right, Mike?
Correct. Yep, that was all stripped out.
This is what was. Mike, can you give us a little bit of a thumbnail, 3-sentence overview of other instances where they have STZs? I know other towns are doing this as well. Is that true?
So, yeah, this is written as a special development district, which is a regulation sort of in the sky. And then if you meet the criteria, you can land the development district on a piece of property. So, I mean, that process is utilized by several communities. This regulation, very, very similarly, I wrote for the town of East Windsor, and that was based upon the fact that both Willington and the town of East Windsor were finalists for a data center project that the state was looking at, which is why you'll see that as one of the allowed uses within the allowed use category.
So, but let me just ask a basic question. This is for the state. Why do you feel so strongly we need this?
What was that?
Why do you feel strongly that we need this at all, SDZ?
Well, I think
What's it help with for you guys?
I'm not an expert at economic development. I just got started, but I think that we should be taking actions to make it as easy as possible within parameters for businesses to locate to Willington and increase our tax base. And that does not mean that I want to short circuit any kind of regulation at all, or make it less sure about what we're doing. But what I do think is that businesses, when they look at opportunities, they look at us in comparison to other towns, and they look at it in terms of where we are, what our tax rates are, what services we offer, and then also what it costs to get something moving. And just to get the first inkling of, is this something that might make sense for my company? So I remember when we had the discussion at EDC, when we passed this, and that we didn't pass, we just voted, and we said, oh, we think it's a good idea, we'll send the planning and zoning. The idea was that we're going to need to have development in Willington moving forward over the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years. That we didn't want to erect any barriers that were super high. We wanted to be reasonable and start trying to promote development that made sense for our town. So we thought it was good. And it wasn't that, I remember the discussion that it wasn't that big of a change. We didn't think, maybe other people think it is, but we didn't think it was that big of a change. It still goes to P&Z, and all the same decisions are made. And P&Z can also ask for, we want more information on this application. You're not tied into only what the applicant provides. I think I'm speaking correctly.
No, from my understanding, like when you look at how it gets there, like you look at these two charts of the traditional and the proactive.
Yeah.
The traditional requires 70% design concept plan. The proactive was 30%. The public hearing was for zone change and special permit. Here it was the public hearing zone change only, as we all lived with the distribution center.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see how, and I think the thought was out there with some members of the public, like when this whole thing was happening, that somehow that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the SDZ. And I don't see that being the case. They could have easily went down our traditional process and landed into the same hurdles they obviously did. So that I'm not quite grasping. And it was kind of coincidental. The SDZ goes in and all of a sudden, boom, this lands, but the truck stop landed without the SDZ. The other things undoubtedly would, even if we never brought back the SDZ, there's still a possibility that somebody comes along without making other changes in the regulations to limit the size of something or so forth, that there's nothing to stop it from coming down the traditional path.
You have to.
So, it kind of went exactly as it should have in a lot of ways. They submitted They had a 30% design plan, came to a public hearing for a zone change, and that's where they ran into trouble.
Right.
And that's where we had the public hearings, we heard the public. You know, and as we all know, it was overwhelming opposition to it, and that's where it landed. So,
Professor of something, I don't know.
I think one of the things that was really brought up and looking at the 30% and what people's comments were, I wonder if part of something that needs to be included in this, and yeah, it's another little hurdle to jump over, but something about a environmental study to be in the front. So, I mean, that seems what, you know, people were talking about that an awful lot. And I think we need to be mindful of that. And it's, you know, if you look at the report that was done in the, I can't remember the name of it, that was done for the PDC. And in that study, they asked the business community what they thought. And, you know, the business community just said, make it simpler. And I'm in agreement with making it simpler, but I also listened to what everybody was saying with the warehouse. And I think putting something in the SDZ kind of up front so that we have an environmental impact. Again, it's getting away from what the business community said, make things simpler. But I think when you look at when that study was done 10 years ago now, or 9 years ago, I think everybody has a different mindset about the impact on the environment. So I think that might be a good thing to be addressed. And also just defining, I think we need to have a discussion about the defining of warehouse. It seems like people felt that they wanted to know what was coming. I know a lot of this is all speculation when the developers come in. You know, it's no different than the Tulis property next to TA. I mean, we don't know what's going to be built there. You know, the sign's up, they're looking for a tenant. Is it, you know, I think again, what the public asked for was clarity and understanding who's coming, especially when it's a large development. And, you know, that's what's kind of floated to the top recently. And they're building a lot of warehouses and people are saying, well, wait, what kind of warehouse is this? You know, because what kind of warehouse depends on how much traffic there's going to be and what kind of traffic, big trucks, smaller trucks. I think that needs to be that needs to be addressed. I'm not quite sure how right now, but I mean, just to start this discussion, I think those are a couple points that need to be in the chatter that goes on.
Is it required, I mean, in regular P and Z, separate from this SDZ zone, is it required that the actual end applicant be named?
no, because when we did Dollar General, they didn't name it. So the answer is no. So, you know, that's,
And not so much
Yeah.
naming who's coming, I think, but what type of a warehouse,
Mm.
you know? And it seems like there's a number of communities that have defined the different types of warehouses. And, you know, I think that gives the community a little more breathing space to better understand. They may not know who, but to understand what is coming.
Well, that could be modified under like item 11 here on the front page, indoor storage and warehousing of non-hazardous project materials. If we wanted to do something like define a warehouse better.
Right,
But you wouldn't only want to define it though in the SDZ, you'd want to define it in our regular
regularly.
process too, because you know, all we do is make a workaround and go the other way.
Right,
Our mission statement on the EDC is to promote economic development that fits what the community and the citizen and the residents want.
You guys use the POCD like we do, you know, to look at that when you're doing it, plan of conservation development.
Almost.
The plan of conservation development is like the guiding document, like for the planning piece of planning and zoning. Does it fit in with the town? Does it fit in with our resources here? Does it fit in with what people said they wanted in the focus group?
I'm saying
Okay,
it has to fit it can't be a square box, a square pole going into a round box, you know, it's gotta be with the community and what's set up today. But it also takes into concern into what the economic requirements of the town. So those are our two marching orders that we have to meet. I'm in this business. I've been in trucking and warehousing for 40 years. I didn't bring this project.
That's okay.
I'm semi-retired,
it's okay if you did, you know, it's,
but I've opened up warehouses in Massachusetts,
yeah.
Chicago, Memphis, Tennessee. And large warehouses that are still working today. And I know the business, and I know the trucking industry, and I know the distribution. How many people have had a small package delivered to their front steps in the past month?
Maybe all of us, of course,
And what's driving that
is distribution.
is the long haul truckers are no longer gonna be around. It's a job that no one wants. So the railroad and the overseas and containerization, which will be greener, is setting up these inventory forwarding positions. It used to be for raw materials. Now it's playing out into the retail sector. So some of these distribution centers are Amazon and some are big box, depending on them. But that's the trend. And it's only gonna get stronger and stronger and stronger. That's why developers, like the people we here in town courting us, are looking for these types of projects because they know the demand is there. And the small package delivery is a good job, pays very well. Quality of life is good. So it's a formula that continues to gain momentum as we support. And we are supporting it because we're getting online and it's there in 2 days. And that's what's happening. And the truckload industry with regards to a driver taking your load of tissue paper from Chicago to Boston is not going to be around 5, 10, 15 years because they don't have the capacity and people aren't getting into the industry. Costs, new trailer. 10 years ago, I could buy for 18 to 25,000. It's now 35 to 40,000. The tractor that I could buy for 110,000 is now 180,000. So the cost associated with, as opposed to containerization and railroading, which is greener, is this is the momentum of why they're out there looking. I just wanted to explain what the forces are that are creating. So we want to talk to you just to get an idea. Because when I walked into Palmer, Massachusetts, and when I walked into what was it? Chicago, what are these? The demands were, we knew what we had to live on. We knew what we had to build. So going in, we knew what our cost structure would be or our liability associated with not getting it and the upfront money that we would need to put in to answer the questions that the community it was something that said we could fit. We needed it because the railroad wanted us to be there. And we could fit, And we knew there was no liability of a town meeting that would shoot it down if we didn't meet these. So that's why we were trying to create something that would allow, I won't use the word to be competitive, attractive.
Well, I think-
And that's why you see these Amazon buildings going up, and it's not because they know the business is there. They know everything that support the business will come.
All you gotta do is take a ride through New York State down into Pennsylvania, you see them all over the place and not anywhere. That's just nearby to us. They're everywhere. And the people here spoke pretty strongly against, that they didn't feel it fit, and with what they wanted in this town. That being said, I don't think this commission is anti-development by any means.
No.
And I think we all kind of realize we need to do something to grow the tax base, and it's probably not gonna get there with tiny little cafes and stuff. You're just never gonna get there. Or we have the village, the language for the village and everything, but we haven't seen any traction there with anything happening, with that zone.
We're very worried about,
And that's kind of a tall order, get people to develop that, invest in it and everything. So, I get where it looked like a big win, like bringing, that giant warehouse in here, but, then you run into the obvious pushback, that happened, and it kind of all of us need to take into account, when you hear something like that. It's like people were overwhelmingly opposed. It wasn't just a handful, it was 98% of the people who
We
spoke.
even asked if we could get an idea
Yep.
of what the operating budget is for the next, what's the pro forma? What's the business plan going out over the next 5 to 10 years for the town?
Yeah.
Just so we can get an idea of what today's costs will be in 5 years, and what's the tax base today versus what it will be then, just to get an idea of what the need is.
we have two lines that are gonna intersect at some point. One of them is revenue and the other one is expenditures.
And I realize a big warehouse used to be 400,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Now the bigger, it's like the container ships, how big they're getting, now the warehouses are following the same trend. And it's probably no coincidence, that that's happening in parallel, because a lot of the goods that go into these things are containerized things out of China and so forth, but
There has been, you can always tell trends of logistics by watching today, especially the railroad. And in the past 2 years, there used to be a railroad up in Maine, Massachusetts, parts of lower Quebec and New Brunswick, Canada, called the BAR, the Bangor Route Railroad. And then they were purchased by the CMQ. And now CP Railroad came in, Canadian Pacific, which was one of the 7 Class 1 railroads in North America, and purchased this little Bafunk Railroad in northern Maine and southern Quebec. And then CSX, who's one of the major 7, purchased Pan Am Rail, which is Boston, Worcester, Connecticut. And there's not a lot of manufacturing going on here. So you scratch your head and say, what's going on? All they want to do is get to the port of St. John, New Brunswick, Halifax, New Brunswick, and Searsport, Maine, because those are the 3 ports that are now going to compete with New York and New Jersey. And they're putting big bucks into the infrastructure of those railroads, again, to bring containers down to the Midwest and to the Northeast. So and that's a 4-year, 5-year plan out. So if you really want to know what's going on in logistics, and I saw that, and my operation that I had up in Palmer, Mass, was sponsored by the Canadian National Railroad. They asked me to put a warehouse up, not to bring product into New England, but to bring product into the Middle Atlantic states. Forest products, copper, all raw materials coming out of Canada. So they're doing it just like these developers are doing, just like Amazon is doing, is they're getting out ahead of the needs 3 to 5 years down the road by laying the groundwork and spending money. And when I first joined the EDC, I came out of the, I was on the finance board for 2 years. And I realized we need to find different ways of bringing revenue into town. And we have a railroad that runs right through us. It's called the New England Central Railroad. They're owned by the Genesee and Wyoming Railroad. They own 108 short lines nationwide.
And we read for as well.
Yep. Yep. And we had some property here that there's the auto gravel pit that in the process of us trying to develop it was sold to F&F out of Plantsville. A competitor, Desiato, Mr. Desiato, after many, many years, decided he was going to retire. And I said, we were sitting on a great exit here on 84 with trucks. And we were also sitting on a railroad that wants to grow. And it is growing, especially as it goes down into New London. So there's a lot of dynamics that are fostering different ways of getting that package to your front step. And that's why we wanted to come back and say, all right, let's see if we can find a way to, again, meet the community needs with regards to what makes sense to develop. But at the same time, understand our 5-year performer on what this town is going to need to operate. Good discussion.
When we look at what is allowed,
Walter, you've got 2 people who got their hands up.
it doesn't matter. This isn't a public hearing.
No, John Tehan and the
Okay.
other
Oh, I see.
EDC
Okay.
person.
John, go ahead.
So I think, thank you, Mr. Chair. So for the record, John Guskowski, Economic Development Commission staff consultant. I think Bill covered a lot of the background, but I was just going to mention that the SDZ discussion actually did have its roots in some of Bill's insight about the railroad situation and the Desiato property in particular, and recognizing that our current regulations, while somewhat modernized, sort of lacked of a flexible element for a mix of uses that would be generated by the use of the Desiato facility or some other rail line proximate multimodal commerce site that would have some warehousing, some storage, some office uses, and a variety of uses that would be sort of not easily fit into the current regulations, and also somewhat changeable over time as different tenants and different shipping operations needs changed. And because of the lack of general ability of a standard zoning regulations to envision not only the mix of uses, but some of the uses in general, we discussed with EDC and then ultimately with planning and zoning the approach that Mike has walked you all through, that it by allowing a little bit more creativity and that particularly taking advantage of the state special design district or floating zone enabling statute, it allowed you to sort of consider on a case-by-case creative solutions to problems that continue to evolve and opportunities that continue to evolve. And I think, Mr. Chairman, as you noted, and I think we noted at the economic development meeting earlier this evening, is that in this case, in the most recent case with the warehouse proposal, the process worked. It wasn't necessarily always pleasant, and it was certainly contentious at times, but that process was specifically designed to vet ideas and to vet proposals, and particularly on track 1, to allow a developer to get essentially a quick no, or relatively quick no, if without investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in design, if the proposed use and proposed site were just not a good match. And to have a more traditional process that the SDZ kind of replaced, allows developers to be a little bit more creative, think a little bit more outside the box, and kind of kick the tires on combinations of location and use in town, without, you know, having to be absolutely certain and invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in their designs up front. So it, you know, it wasn't always pretty, but I think the process worked well, and it's now sort of up to planning and zoning ultimately, but maybe a combined effort to refine the process to a point where it's a little bit more user friendly and a little bit better understood by commissions, applicants, and particularly the public. Thank you.
Thank you, John. John Tehan.
Hi, yeah, I was going to say pretty much exactly the same thing as John said. I thought that the warehouse, when the application came in, the regs that we had for the SDZ worked. They worked as designed. And the developer walked away not having spent $750,000 on a 70% proposal. I was not in favor of the removal of the SDZ from our regs. I thought that it belonged there, and I thought that it worked well. So I just want to echo what John said. Thanks.
Thanks, John. And maybe John Kwiatkowski can answer this or whatever. Many times over the years, like before somebody goes forward with a development, like since I've been on this commission or whatever, people come in for an informal discussion prior to launching something. That never happened with this one. And I think maybe with the other traditional way, you know, that was more likely before they invested the money in a 70%, like, you know, design plan or so, that they at least come down and kick the tires and say, hey, you know, what do you think? You know, that 30% design plan, you know, obviously it wasn't that detailed. They dropped a big box on the piece of property, freaked out everybody. And then things kind of blossomed from there. But that's what I think was lacking in this whole thing, the lack of an informal discussion coming before us saying, hey, you know, we're contemplating doing this. And we had it with the guys with the parking lot thing over at FedEx.
Right.
And so forth. It's kind of nice to get that heads up, you know, before.
And there was good back and forth.
Yes, there was very good back and forth, and it gives you a chance to kind of wrap your head around what's happening and how it fits in with the POCD and everything. And it gives you a chance to at least think, hey, and a lot of us have been here some time. We saw, you know, the reaction to Loves. We saw the different things that happened. So it kind of gives you a good inkling of what's going to happen when something.
Yeah, and I think, well, yeah, and I couldn't say, you know, specifically in this case why the applicants did not come in with a sort of a preliminary discussion. I can say, you know, on basically on both sides of the coin, I do think we could do more to encourage developers, potential applicants to come in for a preliminary discussion, because I think it you know, can give a gut check. In my own personal experience, what I will note, and this is, you know, roughly 20 years over a dozen towns or more that have preliminary discussion processes, is you never hear no, you never hear get the hell out of here. You always, I think generally there is some feedback. There is some, oh, you know, watch out for, you know, traffic, or watch out for these natural resources, or, you know, things like that. But the answer is almost always, all right, we've heard you. We had some thoughts. Come on in with a proposal. And at that point, you're basically at your 70% or whatever. You're at your full special permit process. And so I think, you know, the SDZ, you know, 2-track program was kind of meant to address a little bit of that. But I do agree with you, Mr. Chairman, that we could find a way to encourage, particularly at the staff level, when you know, people are kicking the tires and calling Mike and Chris, and or maybe, you know, showing up at EDC, that we can encourage them to have that preliminary discussion, pre-application discussion. But I think we would need to work better with all the commissions if we're going to have that, to really make sure that we provide useful feedback.
I agree with that, but for us, on this commission, it was kind of a shock just seeing that drop on our agenda. It's like, what's this? It was, it wasn't really expected. It just showed up, and especially something of that magnitude. This wasn't like, the parking lot over at FedEx. This was 100 orders of magnitude larger.
Why do you think that is? Why did it happen that way? Do you have any idea? I don't know.
I have no, it just seems shocking the way the whole thing
I
went
think
down.
they've been kicked down the highway so many times.
And I think
I've heard
that,
rumor they're going in Ashford. The Ashford motels.
that's not, that's been around on.
It's a different subject. So we had an informal discussion with them in the office, and the reg required it. That was put in there mostly because this process is different, and we want to make sure that the applicant understands how the SDZ kind of functions and when you have all of the different hearings. And it's not like an internal strategy meeting. But from an applicant perspective, there's pros and cons to the informal, right? Because if you have the informal, then you potentially have feedback. But also, you don't know, to John's point, yes, rarely do commissions say no, but really, I think you don't know how it's going to be received. So you are putting yourself in a position where you're sort of walking in and providing information on an informal basis about your project that you likely fully intend to submit anyways. And so not every applicant is interested in it, because from a risk perspective, a lot of times they just want to show up ready to go with everything there prepared, got the timeline. Some people, and that's not necessarily smart, like in this case.
Well, these guys had their information sessions that they held for the public of Willington, and then somebody went off the rails and decided they're going to go like visit people's houses. That went over really well. So some things just didn't happen so great, with the way the whole thing kind of ran.
I mean, so, and I don't think the intent of tonight was to get into the weeds of the text, but one of the things that we could work in is that perhaps if someone is going the proactive approach, that we provide some type of strong encouragement, something just short of an obligation, that they attend an informal, or maybe we change the process so that if they have gone through the informal, there's some way to incentivize that. Maybe they have an informal BDC, or maybe then they come before PZC. We can try to work that in.
And I realize that EDCs charge a little different than ours. You're trying to find business to come into the town.
Well, once it makes sense for our town.
Yes, absolutely. I get that. That's why it's the Economic Development Commission and not a Planning and Zoning Commission, but
Right.
just having some sort of a connection though, that to know what's coming and so forth. I get the 30%. It makes a lot of sense to me to show up with 30% to save some money and to make sure that before you invest a lot of money in the plans and everything, to get the level of interest and everything, because there's all the other places where you could, question it before it goes through. So it's pretty well covered down through most of this.
Could that come down to size too? Like you take, for a small business and stuff, that 30% is probably more than they need to know whether they're coming through. And
But
maybe
it's gonna
have
cost
some,
them less to come up with 30% of a storefront than it is 30% of a warehouse.
yeah, but maybe size has to do with which track you might be able to take.
I thought about that as well. I think one of the problems with that warehouse thing, I mean, this is not a discussion about the warehouse, but this was the first one to go under this change. I think, the sheer magnitude and size of that proposed development is just so humongous. I thought about the same thing. I said, maybe just, have a stipulation about size somewhere in here or something like that.
Well, that would have to be read in the regular zoning regulations. We'd have to make that change.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, we could adjust the process so that only certain projects could make use of like the proactive process, we could just include a straight up cap.
Well, all this on this page is what can use the,
Right,
yeah.
but maybe we create performance standards, so based upon the type of project, the process, maybe a cap on the size, so, the proactive approach. I mean, the problem is, there's no difference in the steps, they're all the same. It's just a difference of really it was written so that it gives the developer the opportunity to determine when they want to deal with the risk. The public hearings and all of that is where the uncertainty comes into play. So you can either do it all up front and spend all the money and all the risk, and then the last step is very quick. Or you can do it as you go and incrementally go through the process as you get the building designed, as you get some tenants on board. So it doesn't change the process. We could certainly create some criteria. I would rather do it on a size basis or a use basis than we like 30% for smaller projects and we want 70% for larger projects, because then we have to figure out what the heck 70 and 30% actually are. But we could create a better distinction if the people, it sounds like there's a consensus that the SDZ overall is okay, but we're uncomfortable with the size of the project it brought, well, it didn't bring it as you pointed out, but maybe we just want to create some of those stopping points so that it doesn't allow for such a large project to come forward.
But we heard John's opinion of the SDZ. I think he made it pretty clear, John T. And
Yeah.
I'm in favor of it. I just think it needs some
Well,
trimming a little bit, we don't wind up in that boat again.
I think having the two tracks, we've heard a lot of conversation about doing away with the proactive. And I think the proactive did what it was supposed to do. It gave the developer an opportunity to come, present, and leave, and not put the town in a legal situation that could have occurred if they went with the traditional process. So again, there's two different thoughts about that, but I think the proactive served its purpose.
Yeah, I had a comment.
Bill.
We spoke of environmental concerns earlier. It seems like the SDC doesn't have any limitation as far as what kind of disruption of the environment's gonna happen, like when they were gonna have to do that blasting on that mountain for the large warehouse, how much water consumption there was gonna be, and the concerns over, sewage needs and public water supplies. And I was wondering about, on the multiple family dwellings, would that pose any kind of concern over the amount of water usage that there would be? And
Similar concerns, depending on the size of it.
so I was wondering if we could see some kind of safety zone as far as what kind of project you would consider for the SDZ if it had something like these really overriding concerns of excavation, disruption of the environment, or placing undue strain on water resources.
Here's the problem, Bill. What about our regular zoning regs and the traditional process? What checks and balances are in there for that and there? It goes to engineering, and so forth. And we're not experts on, the water flows in the area. That's why all that testing needs to be done and everything prior to.
Well, it's one of the things that Tolland had to confront, and I know I bring this up all the time, but in Tolland, if you come down 195, you're on the top of the hill where the gas station is, you come down, all that development, that housing development that was put in, it was there for about 10 years. And then people's wells started going dry because there wasn't enough recharge for the amount of building that went on there. Tolland, well, this is the way some people tell it. The town had to develop a water company to supply that development with water. So, and one of the things that Andy and I have been talking about, and I addressed it with Mike, is that everybody buys a piece of property with the mindset that I'm gonna build my house, I'm gonna drill a well, and there's gonna be water there. Well, what happens if there isn't water there in 2 or 3 years? Or if you bought the property and there isn't enough water? I don't care if you go 500-600 feet and you're gonna get 4 gallons a minute. Well, maybe that's enough for a household. But what does that say about the general proximity?
Yeah.
So it is a concern. And, you know, you see Yukon building and building and building. When is somebody gonna say, hey, they've already sucked the one
Hey,
river
river,
dry
yeah.
one time. Now they're bringing water in from the Schnipsit Lake. So, yeah, it's a concern. It doesn't have to be necessarily an industry or a warehouse or something like that. It can be a very large housing development or apartments or something like that are using a large volume of water. You know, and, you know, Willington's always looking to pinch the penny. Well, how are we gonna pinch the penny if all of a sudden you need to supply X number of people or businesses?
Say like 60
with water?
households right in that small area. Right in a small development area, if it was a multi-family dwelling. I mean, there's gonna be a big apartment push right down on 195.
You see it going, they're already working on it.
Yeah, sure.
Well, they're fed by water. There's a 12-inch main that goes up 195. But so Bob and I have talked about this, and I've been sort of thinking about how to, if there's some tangible language that can be included in the reg here. And the problem that I'm coming up against is it's a question that doesn't actually have a definitive answer. To some extent, because I understand the concern, it makes complete sense to me. You want to make sure that if someone's going to be drawing an extra 100 gallons for this project, that they're not drawing someone else's 100 gallons that they've already been using, right? Problem is, I don't know that you can really truly delineate exactly how much water is available, who's using it, because when you test and there's so many variables. There's a lot of modeling that Love's had to do for the state to determine if that SWAS was going to work, and they couldn't figure it out because of some issues with bedrock and et cetera. And I don't know how you could perform those analyses. But I'm thinking of, I mean, certainly the public health department would require, when they do all the test pits and drilling for wells, et cetera, determine what the yield would be. So I'm thinking in my head, is there a way for us to basically require that if a project is of a certain size, that they can demonstrate that there is, almost like with septic, you have to be able to demonstrate your septic and your reserve. So if you need 100 gallons a day, we want you to provide us with some set data that shows that your site will provide you with 150. Right? We want to know that that there's a 1.5 times capacity to what your demand is going to be. Something. I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm just trying to figure out how we can ask a question that actually has an answer, so that when they do this analysis, they can come to you and say, we've done this, and here's the information, and you can do something with that.
And of course, the underlying strata varies as you move across the landscape. That differs. You know, how much of a recharge is there in certain areas as opposed to other areas, depending on what your strata is underground. You don't know.
Yeah, John, have you, is this anything like that? Like, well, I guess it's not Gene Davies anymore, but trying to find somebody, or, I mean, I guess you've heard kind of what we've been talking about, sort of a way to go through this to make sure that if you bring a big development online, that they don't just start kind of moving in the direction of pulling water that people are already accessing, or how you demonstrate that ahead of time?
Well, it's interesting. So in Mansfield, just recently, the text amendment, the proposed map amendment that would have landed the MCT zone. So this is it's a mixed use commercial district immediately beyond the Four Corners area, the intersection of 195 and 44. Actually heading just back towards Willington on 195, they were rezoning a portion to this special design district. And part of, they didn't have sort of the 2-track process, but this was basically a map amendment. And as part of that map amendment, they did require some certification that public water, wastewater, and traffic capacity were all sufficient for the type and extent of potential development that landing that zone on that parcel would demand. And so in that case, they got a letter from the sewer, WPCA, that there was sufficient sewer capacity, and they did some, subsurface, some hydrogeological investigation to demonstrate, that there was an aquifer that would yield sufficient flow rates to supply, the level of intensity proposed. So it did require some more specific investigation. So it basically ratcheted up the cost a little bit, somewhat, maybe in the order of, a couple of tens of thousands rather than, 100,000 for a full, 70% engineering design. But it did reassure the commission, who hasn't yet decided the matter, by the way, that if they allowed generally that scale of development envisioned by the overlay zone, that there was sufficient utility capacity and road capacity to satisfy it. So ratcheting those things up a little bit, not necessarily all the way, is certainly a reasonable approach.
Okay.
I think you have to look at the size and scale of what is coming in. Now, you wouldn't obviously do that for a small development.
Does anybody know what Mansfield's processes are? Like, does ours kind of mimic it similar? No.
Mansfield so we are currently rewriting Mansfield zoning regulations.
Yeah.
They have a monumentally complicated set of regs. The difference is they have really strong demand. They, whether it be housing and some of those more commercial areas.
Yeah.
So I think we've talked about with affordable housing stuff, they have a process where you can buy your way out of having to build affordable housing units. You can pay the town a fee in lieu of, and then you can purchase density. So they may allow 300 units, but you can buy in beyond that, which is gonna land them a check for, like, they maybe just got one for like $1.5 million into their housing trust fund, which then they can use to add on to Button Hill or something like that. So they have developers kicking their door in right now. They have the opposite problem. So it's a little bit different, and I guess I'll say I'm not aware of, because I don't want to say definitively, but they don't have any parcels that even touch the size of the parcels that we would have, right? 360 acres of industrial land, like big.
Nowhere near highways, which is like the critical feature here.
So we talk about Mansfield, about other areas in terms of towns around here.
Ashford, Union.
Union doesn't have much because the stuff on the north side of that exit.
What I'm getting at, I'm sorry for interrupting, what I'm getting at is, are there other towns that are rural towns in our area where they're running into the same problems that we are in terms of grandless growth in the future? And what are they doing?
Ashford is going through a text amendment process right now that I'm working with the commission on, because they have a developer who's owned a property for many years, and he's workshopped a couple of different uses. They had some type of a trash recycling facility many years ago, wind farm.
Yeah.
Both of which were flatly rejected by the town.
Yeah.
So now he's aligned with a Massachusetts-based development company, and they want to put in 1.1 to 1.5 million square feet because it's right on the highway. And they're going through a text amendment process because there's some stuff in the Ashford regs which don't make sense, like an industrial building at 35 feet high. And then they'll move into the special permit process. It's the same, they're going through the same thing, and they're dealing with the same issues of how do you balance? Is this too big? Is it not? Grand list preservation the difference there is that project falls on a property that's IID zone, which is a commercial development zone, which had been established by the town many, many years ago.
They don't need a zone change.
They don't need a zone change, they need a text change and then a special permit. But the same issues of water consumption, runoff, impacts to water courses, traffic light, noise.
Public hearings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of those, everything is on the table just as it was here. But there, if you head in the opposite direction, the next town, Vernon doesn't really have anything that would support anything like that. Manchester has that facility that you see, which was existing, but there's really nothing on the,
That's the Winston one.
yeah, right.
If
And
you-
that was already there.
If you look up and down I-395, if you go a little bit farther east, a lot of those communities, your Putnam, Thompson, Killingly, Plainfield, all have exits on 395. They do tend to be relatively heavily commercially and industrially zoned. Plainfield just, is opening a $1 million Amazon facility off of 395 also. So I mean, it's the circumstances are a little bit different in different communities. But your interstate interchange communities are the ones that have sort of a bullseye on right now.
Some things to think about.
And Mike, I don't know if you do want to just circle back and note that there is going to be a strategic planning process starting.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that. So the EDC had two requests through ARPA. One was the small business grants, which they did, and they handed out just under $300,000. And the other was to request planning monies for basically a town strategic plan, a townwide strategic plan. And I'm not gonna step on their toes as far as explaining it, but the thumbnail version, or my takeaway is really trying to explore kind of where both of those things mean, trying to understand what the market supports, what our geographic location, the parcels, et cetera, all of those things really is the types of uses that's going to facilitate. And then also trying to understand the financial life, what the next 10, 15, 20 years of Willington look like. And trying to then do some outreach and really pull all that together and say, okay, this is what the market wants, this is what the budget wants, this is what the residents want, and how do we pull that around, right? At some point, there may be a conversation that has to happen here where we say, well, the market wants these uses, but we don't. And if the answer is we don't, then we have to decide what to do. And that may be a retraction of, I don't know, more finance spending, and maybe a whole bunch of things, but we want to really strategically think about how we can move forward and be more informed than just sort of the blue sky approach that comes out of the POCD.
Well, I think one of the things where there's two mindsets going, EDC and how can you build businesses in the community? And what I heard with the warehouse, the community has an idea of the businesses they would like to have here. In a lot of cases, the businesses they would like to have here don't fit those businesses' essentials in order to come here. And most of it's population. There isn't enough population to sustain their business
Well, that's your
model.
shops, that's your restaurants, that's your things like that.
You
They're
know.
never gonna locate where they're not gonna have the head
You know,
count.
people would like to see an Aldi's supermarket here and, retail. Their business model doesn't work with the population that we have in this area. So, do we ask the public to chime in on this? And, but everybody has to understand. It's one thing to want something, but then it's another thing to understand what it takes to get that.
That's why we kind of felt that if we had a best case, worst case, most likely scenario where our requirements, financial requirements as a town were going for, felt comfortable and sharing that information, it might help those decisions. Another reason that this developer was looking at this exit here in Connecticut. Not only because of its logistics proximity to dense population areas, but these warehouse operations and fulfillment hire a lot of temporary people. And I don't mean temporary, you're here today, like 4 or 5 hours, and they locate next to major universities for students who are looking for part-time work. So that was another, so it fit, Albany, Boston, New York City, Providence, and then the railroad, which would bring containers. And then finally, there was a source of people that they could hire. And all those things added up, and Walter, I understand what you're saying about, if they could have approached it differently, but I think these guys are just out there because they see the demand, they see the money that's going into it from all aspects of logistics. And they're going from opportunity to opportunity to opportunity. I mean, they had a firm hired just to handle the marketing of it. It was an unusual request, I agree with you, it was.
Trouble is, when you speculate that most of your workers are gonna come from a university, which I'll debate that somewhat. It is, you basically stress the other business around here. FedEx struggles to find enough people to man that place. Like the place where I work, it's not easy finding help. Now, where I work pays a lot more than a warehouse pays. There's a shortage of workers. So when you drop something that's gonna have like thousands of workers, it's gonna do something. And when I was down in Pennsylvania, and I brought this up when the whole thing was going on, we have a plant down in Schuylkill Haven, down in that part of Pennsylvania, and they're struggling to find people. And you have like big Wiegmans, like distribution centers down there and so forth. They bring in most of their workers out of the Philadelphia area, keep them up in like Hampton Inns and everything. The Hampton Inn down there in what was it, Pine Grove or whatever, it was 80% filled with workers for Wegmans distribution center. So that they're not finding the workers locally, they're dragging them in to keep these places running. So, and we all know what's going on right now with workers. There's still, even though the economy's starting to cool a bit, it's still difficult to find the people to do these jobs.
Well, that Harrisburg, Allentown, Philadelphia triangle feeds Washington, Richmond, Virginia, New York City.
It's a busy route.
It's 250 miles from everywhere. And that's why it's been that way for 30 years.
Walter.
Yeah.
If we don't have enough people to work in businesses that might want to come, maybe we should be looking at trying to add population and looking at projects that would enable that to happen.
So then it creates all kinds of other problems, like in case anybody hasn't had their head in the sand, we're talking about building a school for 400 kids.
Because they need to have more people.
Then you add more people that, it just, housing usually costs you money. It doesn't gain you money, like a business.
The development and then the housing, and then the development and the housing, but it needs the chicken and the egg.
Yeah.
It's the chicken first.
Mhm.
I enjoyed this.
No, it was a good discussion.
Good start.
Not sure where we're at right now. I think there's some things to look at.
Yeah.
And discuss, I don't think everybody's against the SDZ. I didn't hear that.
I think it worked. I mean, as we talked about the proactive process, it worked. We went through all the steps. It was almost kind of like a big test, because you said it, Walter, they dropped a 30% design plan, huge, freaked everybody out. So maybe going forward, it's trying to encourage, I know, back a little bit to the traditional, kind of like a hybrid, encourage one of these developers or somebody coming, say, hey, we've been through this already. A 30% design plan, if you drop something huge and say, hey, we're thinking of this, you're gonna freak everybody out and that's gonna be it. And the town is just going to try to shutter it right then and there. 70% might be a bit too much, but maybe just the encouragement of that conversation, just a forewarning, make your 30% good, like 30% just not shock and awe, something that is somewhat mindful.
Well, if you remember right, a lot of the time was spent criticizing, the piece of property they were gonna be on, the switchbacks to even go up the driveway, the whole, the geography. So, maybe a little bit more thought there might have helped them.
Right.
But if it was, it opened the door to a lot of criticism of the whole thing, just based on,
Well, one of the things I found interesting with the folks in New Jersey with the parking lot for FedEx, they came in and we were able to make them aware of our concerns of runoff and such like that. So before they come in with any plans, they're already aware of a lot of the questions that we're going to ask. They can be mindful in their design. With the SDZ, again, with the proactive, 30% may be all right if they understood that maybe they need to have the environmental impact before. Yeah, they're only at 30%, but they've got to shovel something else at it to get that understanding of what they're really dealing with. They're still ahead of the game. But I think everybody else would be in town, and PZC would be a little more at ease with what was coming at us, really. I think it's workable. I think it's massageable.
One of the things that we're trying to work to is an actual proposed set of revisions, which will go to public hearing so that the public can participate, because we've heard obviously a lot that that's something that there's a number of people interested in. And so I think the purpose of this, and I think there can be more, as many as you guys are interested in, was trying to figure out where everybody was so that we can be close with whatever suggestions or proposed revisions. And I don't know that we're at a point where we necessarily want to start talking about modifications, but I think that maybe as a next step, and tell me if this is what you think or not, would be for us to try to put together some proposed solutions to some of the questions that have been brought up. So this is how we might address. There's simple ones like definitions. We all
of a warehouse.
right. So we can provide some example definitions. So that to me is fairly simple and easy to put together. Another one I think it sounds like is how to evaluate whether there should be a ceiling, whether there should be some maximums for development, and maybe the commissions can talk about if that's a size thing, if it's a coverage thing, if it's based upon uses, but
Size.
yeah. So getting to a point where it doesn't just go on forever, to create some comfort that we have a better understanding of what might walk through the door because we've created a top end. Some relevant and reasonable requirement for environmental due diligence. So whether it be looking at how it worked in Mansfield or otherwise, and maybe based upon what we arrive at for all projects or some projects, but for larger ones in particular, wanting to make sure that there's that information up front. Perhaps moving it so that the scale is sliding a bit so that we require more as the project gets larger, so that the simplicity is maintained for smaller projects. And then moving to require or incentivize the informal discussions at the commission level, which are always allowed and could always happen at the request of the applicant, but maybe we need to do more to say, like, we want this to happen.
I think we need to be more proactive about that to get Congress, them to talk to us. I really do.
So, does that make any sense to you?
Well, I think it's a good starting point.
Just to say, here's the things you talked about, here's how you might approach it. And then you can sort of go through and say, yeah, we like this, we don't like that. And then from there, we can start slotting some of those potential solutions into actual red. I'm just trying to figure out how we can get to another point.
I think that's a good direction to go in.
I do too. I do too. Maybe we get some of that stuff together. We have another session just to review it. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
What do you guys think? With EDC again? I think so, after the changes are made.
It's a little different.
It's different, but you know what, we get something, then we can go forward with the public hearing and so forth. So once we get something nailed down, but you know, I think there's no debating like something like the proactive process probably works real well for some of these smaller things, you know, so it's, but like Mike's idea of a sliding scale, the bigger it gets or whatever, you know, that is some merit.
Well, I think one of the things that we're at a disadvantage in town is,
Besides water.
well,
and,
no, we're
sewer.
dealing with the plan of conservation and development. Most towns, or a good number of towns, deal with their plan of development. And it's easier to deal with that than a combination that we deal with. You know, I grew up in a town where you get a letter in the mail and it says, oh, by the way, your property's just been rezoned for multifamily. That's it, the end. That's the way it is now. You know, we don't deal with things like that in Willington. You know, we have a more conversation about that. So it has its challenges. It really does.
I'm not here now.
All right, so we want to wrap this discussion up
Yeah.
for the night.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Until we have a little bit more structure to
right.
work on.
Mike, with this, we don't need to make motions to close this or anything.
No, so I'll just put together some suggestions and we can, yeah, based upon that, we can, you know, they'll be in the packet, so it'll be something that everybody can see.
Okay, very good. And then we can like see what these guys, what their schedule is, and maybe at some point
Coming back.
come back.
Yep.
Next meeting, hopefully we're dealing with the backer stuff and so forth. And
Yep.
all right. All right, so item F, unfinished business, nothing under that tonight. This brings us to approval of minutes from the 7th of February.
I move the minutes of February 7th, 2023 be approved as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, good, John.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, H, correspondence, anything, Mike?
So the only thing that I wanted to bring up that I just got, and I haven't had a chance to really go through all of it, but we got an email from one of the principal planners at CROG about what they're calling an affordable housing pilot. And basically, they are asking towns to indicate their interest in an affordable housing implementation initiative. So they're trying to come up with at a more regional level, towns that are interested in going through kind of what they're calling building together community-focused affordable housing plan implementation in Greater Hartford. So again, it's taking a regional approach to the implementation of this, and we haven't finalized the affordable housing plan here, but they're calling it a 9-month pilot program. There's some basic information as far as what it involves, as far as some listening sessions and some other stuff in association with Sustainable CT. But I didn't know if that was something that you wanted me to try to get more information on or indicate that we had interest. We're not asking necessarily to participate, but is that something that
I think we're better off finishing our own regulations first, before we start like going down that rabbit hole.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And, no, other than that, I don't have anything else specific. Speaking of the property and the exit there, we have had some back and forth in the office with the applicant, Mr. Thompson, who was here. And I guess a little bit surprisingly, they have had some fairly strong interest from a number of tenants for the pad site. So the problem, there are a few things that have come up sort of consistently as far as, oh, this would be great, but we don't have this, or what do we think about that? And so he's at this point where he's trying to sort of shop the property around to different users, and has a couple of things that have come up that I think he wants to pick your brain on as far as what are the thoughts, do we like this versus not that? So I suspect that in the next couple of weeks, next couple of meetings, he's gonna be before you for an informal to kind of just let you know where he's at and get your feedback on what he probably should pursue more heavily and what is less interesting. But yeah, man, he is doing well as far as workshopping it around to interested parties, which is a good thing.
Yeah, okay, interesting. All right, that was all for correspondence.
Yep.
All right, that brings us to public participation. And again, that's for items not listed on the agenda. Anyone from the public?
Zafir Hussein, 48 Myrtle Road. I'm asking again for the board and committee to review the ADU requirements that the state has imposed, which I believe we exempted from. I would like to ask that to be a agenda topic for the next meeting or some near time future. Thank you.
Okay. Other public participation. Anyone? Okay.
Well, excuse me, sorry.
You're never up, Ralph.
Ralph Tulis, 47 Village Hill Road. I'd hope to be able to participate in your workshop, but apparently you were not allowing the public to participate in a workshop. I think it would have been appropriate to do so. I certainly have a bunch of random thoughts that would contribute to your goal and trying to.
We're not supposed to talk about anything on the agenda, Ralph.
I'm not talking about anything. I'm talking about what I could have talked about on the agenda. But anyway,
Right.
That's all. That's all. I was just a little disappointed that I couldn't have an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ralph. Nick Tella.
Hey, Nick Tella, 49 Myrtle. I just want to second what Ralph's saying. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Nick. All right. Staff report or discussion, anything?
Nothing beyond
Other we have the class coming up on the 11th.
the class coming up on the 11th, so we did all the registrations. I think the way we set up, the books are gonna come to town hall.
Yep.
So we'll get the books and then at our March meeting, hand them out. They're pretty big. And like I said, when that informal when we hear back from the folks on Ruby, we'll bring that informal to you. Anything else that's notable? We talked about the codification and how that was approved through ARPA. So now you have to go through the process of procurement and hopefully getting that kicked off. And some other stuff, we've been working on some grant. We submitted a trip grant application on Friday. We went through, which is a transportation road improvement program, which is a DOT project administered through the various COGS. So I sent that out Friday afternoon. It would facilitate drainage on Village Hill Road. There are 8 eligible towns within CROG. CROG is allowed to submit 4 projects to DOT for review. So they'll have to go through and score them. The downside is that it's not like a bike pedestrian project. We don't have sidewalks and some of the other stuff that the South Willington Village project had. That was a different grant, but it's the same scoring in a lot of ways. So the project doesn't have a match, so the town would not be required to commit funds. And then I guess just to, in that vein for TRIP or for grants, Lot SIP, we have a pre-design meeting with the folks at CROG to go over our, basically like our 90% submission in a couple of weeks. We'll go through and get feedback from them and then further refine, and then we'll have to start the outreach process as far as the final designs and working with property owners. So that project is moving forward. Lastly, Village Springs rather, they have been cruising through their development, their project.
I see it for the woods. When
Yeah.
time I go home.
So he followed up with us, and one of the things that we really were pushing for is removal of a lot of those trailers. A significant portion of them have been removed or continue to be removed. So that project, it was good to see that finally happen. That's what I got.
All right, it's 8:51 PM, meeting adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.